USModernist Radio is part of DesignNetwork.org, exclusive architecture and design podcasts reaching creative listeners worldwide.
Hello, everyone. This is James McLean, the co-founder of Dirt.com, and you're on the air with US Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to US Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Now, back in the early 1960s, the most famous musicians in America were John, George, Paul, and Ringo, also known as the Beatles. If you were a British singer in 1963, you were up against the massive fame and attention the Beatles generated. In the modernist enclave of New Canaan, Connecticut, in 1963, the most famous architects were the Harvard Five: Marcel Breuer, Elliot Noyes, Philip Johansen, John Johansen, and Landis Gores. It was hard to be an architect up against all that talent, but one man did. Joining us is architect James Evans, who died earlier this year in his last interview. Later on, jazz with musical guest Janis Siegel of the Manhattan Transfer. And now, your host, who no one calls the fifth Beatle, George Smart.
So true. No one has ever called me the fifth Beatle. I mean, really, why would they? Back in 1963, however, my dad had a Beetle, a tan Volkswagen Beetle he brought home by boat from Germany. At 3 years old, I woke up one day to see 5 Beetles together in the driveway, and better yet, my dad and his pals driving super fast, I thought, down Glenwood Avenue in Raleigh, North Carolina. Original Volkswagen Beetles had a particularly unique and loud sound, a cross between an old gas lawnmower and a house paint mixer you might find at Home Depot or Sherwin-Williams. At 60 miles an hour, a quiet conversation with the person next to you was out of the question, as was air conditioning. But the thrill of darting around other cars, basically land yachts, never got out of my system.
Now, did an early Beetle not have a gas gauge either? That's what somebody told me.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Early days, if you ran out of gas, you switched a valve and it went to a little tiny reserve tank, but there was no gauge.
Wow. Yeah, it was pretty simple, basic car.
Yeah.
It's no wonder I've owned small cars like the Honda CRX, and now I'm on my 4th Mini Cooper. You can park these cars anywhere, and they are quiet. But I do miss that special Volkswagen Beetle sound. You really knew you were driving. They issued a new one in the 1990s, but it was basically a VW Golf made to look like a Beetle.
Yeah.
Sadly, Beetles are no longer in production, but you can occasionally rent an original one in Mexico and other parts of Central and South America. US Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll. Although, hey Volkswagen, hey Honda, hey Mini, hey Tesla, you could be on board with this sponsorship too. We're just an email away.
In a story that we are largely making up, modernist realtor Angela Roll worked her way through college, dancing like no one's watching to the Mambo No. 5 and brilliantly house-flipping Neuter houses, sometimes simultaneously. At the age of 23, following a celebrity-filled party at a famous L.A. hillside modernist house involving late-night swimming, fig-infused goat cheese, absolute citron, and a new use for graphite, Angela was recruited to architecture school, where she spent years in sleep-deprived design studios. Now she's a modernist real estate agent with specialized design training, advising buyers and sellers on everything, from appropriate renovation to staging a martini party for 200 from 2,800 miles away. That last part is true. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550.
Thank you, Tom. Architect Jim Evans was born in New York City and worked both in his family's printing business and as a ball boy at the U.S. Open. He served in World War II in Europe, including Patton's army in the famous Battle of the Bulge. After the war, he earned bachelor's and master's degrees in architecture from Yale, studying under Louis Kahn. He lived for 2 years in Switzerland and then Levittown, New York, working for several architects, including Paul Rudolph. By 1957, he moved to the Modernist mecca of New Canaan, Connecticut, and by then the town had many Modernist houses, not only by the Harvard Five of Breuer, Noyes, Johansen, Johansen, and Gores, but others like Frank Lloyd Wright and Edward Durell Stone. Although, as we've mentioned in previous shows, the town's citizenry was not particularly welcoming and still haven't really warmed up after 70 years. Jim's long career in Connecticut design spans 7 decades and many projects. You can find his cool houses at www.usmodernist.org/Evans. Jim died in early 2021, just a few years short of 100. Here's U.S. Modernist special correspondent Rafe Schlanger talking with Jim in his last interview. Hi, Rafe. Thanks for joining us. Tell me about your day with Jim Evans. What was that like?
Well, it was a beautiful day. I drove out. He's about an hour and a half from my house. And I met him at his condominium. And we just sat and chatted for quite a while. He's very welcoming and very friendly. Maybe a little bit nervous because he hadn't been interviewed like this very often, I wouldn't imagine. But we had a great conversation.
Tell me some of the highlights for you of talking with Jim.
Well, I mean, I have always had a real love and appreciation and sort of fascination of the house that he built for himself on Benedict Hill Road in New Canaan. So when he was explaining to me some of the technical details about his house and how it was constructed, I mean, that was just music to my ears. And it was also, some of what he talked about, like his experience working with Louis Kahn when he was at Yale. And Louis Kahn I'm not sure if he was like a full-time professor there or maybe a visiting professor, but he spoke so glowingly about Louis Kahn that, really left an impression on me.
Here's Rafe Schlanger talking with architect James Evans.
Maybe we can start by telling me a bit about your life before you became an architect. Where did you grow up? How did you come to architecture?
And basically, I grew up in Forest Hills, Long Island. I went through local PS 101. Then I went to Loomis up in Windsor, Connecticut. And I liked writing, I liked English. And so I concentrated that. There were only 4 German students up there, so I took German too, because everyone else was taking French. From there, I went, the war came along. 43, I took a summer term at Yale. Didn't major in anything at that point, just you're waiting to go into the Army. In 43, I went into the Army. I got out in 46, out of the Army. I went to Columbia for the summer term and really went back into some of my English. And then I went on back to Yale at that point as an undergraduate. And the second year, I just got captivated by 2 professors that were there. One was Henry Russell Hitchcock. It was like Architecture 101. And the other was Vince Scully. His name was very well known and it was so articulate and things. And I got caught with architecture, which is, you might say, from half creative design and half how does design go together, the engineering part of it. I was more on the design end of it, but it was a combination of the curiosity, how things do get put together. And I followed through as an undergraduate, and then from 49 to 52, Yale was a 7-year school. Only a couple of them were 7-year schools, and Harvard was too. But a lot of schools, like Rensselaer, the technical schools, were 6 years at that time. Then I really hadn't traveled, other than in the Army, I traveled all over Europe, but really hadn't gone back to that. So I took my first job in Switzerland for 2 years. And I went over with 3 months, my wife and a 3-month-old baby. and we lived in Winterthur, Switzerland. I worked for a Swiss architect over there with the ability to travel the continent pretty much. And when I returned, I worked for a couple of New York architects, and Alfred Easton Poor was one. And I also did renderings, and I worked for George Cooper Rudolph, was the prime renderer in New York. He did renderings for big firms, Skidmore, and firms all over the country, really, that he did that. And there were about 4 or 5 of us in the office. And people like me put in the mullions and things like that. And George would do the beautiful landscape paintings and things. And then I had a small commission out on Long Island. And I asked George if I could run a desk space for him so I do my own thing. And so my own thing was working part-time for him and doing what I wanted to do. One thing led to another, and I ended up with a substantial job out on Long Island. Those were those 80 co-op units that were on the ocean front out there called Rondoon. So that was really my first big major project, which was at that time my own project out there.
And what year was this?
This was 64 too, 63, 64 was when it came out, about the time of the World's Fair, because I'd be driving out to Long Island and coming back. At that time in 64, I also started building the house in New Canaan. So that was the start of my office there. I had 2 brothers, and they would only ask me, Jim, when are you going to get a job? I could have stayed in the city, but at that time I had 3 children and decided to move my office to Stanford. And actually I was using an engineering firm in Stanford, Jensen and Korst, their name was. They did the World's Fair work. They were the engineers for Rondoon, which was the 80 co-op units on Long Island. And the builder for the work in World's Fair was F.D. Rich Company out of Stanford. I started doing a fair amount of work with them. They were doing housing work and things like that. And basically I had started in Stanford at a propitious time. The big office at that time in Stanford was Sherwood, Mills and Smith, who were excellent architects. They did a lot of school work and school buildings and that type of work. It was a big office. They probably had 20 working for them at that time.
Just to backtrack a little bit to your time at Yale, was Louis Kahn there at that time?
Louis Kahn was there, and Yale was a system of visiting critics. Saarinen was there at one time, I think shortly after, I think he had started the TWA terminal at that time.
Okay.
About that year, he was there. And Saarinen was, he had 2 cohorts with him, I forget their names, and Saarinen would breeze by. The 2 cohorts were good. They'd spend time with you. The others, Ed Stone was there one time. With Ed Stone, he was a good critic in the morning, but as soon as noontime and lunchtime came, in the afternoon, if you saw Ed Stone coming, you'd scurry away.
Oh, really?
Because he liked his lunch.
Right, a few highballs and whatever.
That was the time. Lloyd Flood was his cohort, who was quite good at that time. And then the last 2 years was Louis Kahn, and he's probably the best. He was superb as a mentor, and well, he wouldn't do anything for you, but he'd talk a little bit and this and that. And by the time he left, your brain had cleared up a little bit, and he'd come around. But Louis had the ability to talk in any field. He could talk in astronomy. He could talk in social fields. He could talk in, design fields, engineering, call them fields, but he could talk color. He could paint a total picture. He was articulate, and he had you were talking to him, you felt a personal relationship with him, that he wasn't talking to you at arm's length or anything like that. So that was Louis Kahn.
Let's talk a little bit about coming to the area and what things were like in this area of Connecticut, the New Canaan, Wilton, Stamford area, how you found it and the other architects that were here and the relationship between the architects, because you came in not in the beginning of when everybody else came, but shortly thereafter.
I probably actually moved here in 59. We were running a house in 59 on Valley Road in New Canaan. I was using the engineers I mentioned on projects, and 4 acres became available. And I bought 4 acres in those years for $7,000. And we could see Long Island Sound, high ground, we could see Long Island Sound. I had a roommate from school who bought the next 4 acres. I built that house too. Actually, I built it just before mine. I was building a house for him on Benedict Hill Road in New Canaan. It was just uphill from my house a little bit. With the school system and having a family, it was the decision to move. My office was in an apartment house on Center Street in Stamford, on the first floor. That's when we worked on the Jordan Pavilion with, at that time, doing the World's Fair work. I was doing my house at the same time. And being an apartment house, we were on the first floor, but we could smell the cabbage being cooked on the second floor. And close to the engineers that were used. And that's when I had a couple of projects, housing projects, in Stamford, one called Friendship House, that F.D. Rich was building. Later on, there was another large contracting firm, which over time I did a lot of work, which got to be good clients and good friends also.
So work brought you to Stamford, and New Canaan just had good schools and good for the family.
I had good schools. I had gone to Loomis up in Hartford, so I knew Connecticut, and I'd been 7 years in New Haven, so I knew the area down here. And of course, some of our classes were held in the Glass House was there at that time, so some of our classes were held in down in the Glass House in New Canaan with Philip down there at the time. Roya had a house in there, and the other architect that was in the area that did a couple of houses, Johansen, was working in the area, had done some houses down there, with 2 houses I can think of here.
Mm-hmm. Did you know these people personally? I
knew Philip a little bit. No, the others I didn't know personally. No.
Was there socializing amongst the architects? Because it seemed like there was such a concentration of architects in that one small town.
So not particularly. I mean, I'd see Elliot Noyes had been a critic. He had been working at Yale when I was in school. He worked as a critic, so I knew him there. I knew the house. I guess I crisscrossed his children someplace there.
So I guess there wasn't so much of a kind of social interaction amongst the various architects.
I don't think it was, no. I think when there were talks or meetings, there'd be a gathering of architects. Sometimes the AIA would have a meeting in the area. A few architects would appear.
Do you have any stories from those days when you were in New Canaan at some of these talks? Maybe you can recount the story of taking the licensing exam with Philip Johnson.
The advantage of going to school and taking tests for your license a schoolboy has a good chance because he's been working in trusses and structure and review right up to the last minute. But so, it's quite easy. You're used to taking tests. It's 4 days of exams, and usually you're pretty good with the design in this, where you're weak in mechanical equipment and electric and things like that. So I got through most of it the first time I took it, and 6 months later took the mechanical and things like that and got through it. And I took it at the same time Philip Johnson. This was the design problem, and Philip Johnson was taking his for the first or second time. He was taking design. And Philip Johnson he used a 9H pencil. He didn't believe in soft pencil. And after about 2 hours, he stood up on the desk and said, "This is ridiculous." And he walked out. And I think it took about another 2 years that he finally got his license in there. But that was odd. And in our drafting room, which was called, at Yale was called Weir Hall. It was an old building. We had pastel drawings on the walls and around, and some paintings up. And it was always a glass house on a different part of the world. Sometimes you'd see a glass house painted on the moon. Sometimes it would be on another planet. You'd find one in the jungle. And this was the time of Philip's glass house. And we would have classes occasionally in New Canaan in the new glass house. I forget the year it was done though. Had to be the early years, early also. This was 1950 probably.
Right.
Yeah.
Was there at Yale like a very strong leaning toward the modernist aesthetic?
Yeah, very definitely. It was creative architecture. There was really nothing else that was being done. You had a very good background training in the classics, both European and a lot of McKim, Mead, and Wright, and what happened in Newport, and things like that. But it was the care that those architects took with their details and things. You understood it wasn't the style that you were after. It was the care and thought that you were putting into it. And you had your California architects at that time from the 20s.
Like Schindler and Neutra and things like
that?
Well,
Neutra was current. Well, current, quite current with us, but he was 5-10 years ahead. And there was a Neutra house in Stamford. There weren't any Mac mansions that came. There were big houses that came out, but not in the format of Mac mansions.
So your first modernist house that was in New Canaan, when was that? And tell me a little bit about that one.
That was a Delaney house in Stamford on the Miamis River. And I have a rendering downstairs of that house, and I have the pictures of it here. 2 Yale students that had graduated, Hank Taft and Chet Brayman, had bought 20 acres of land in Stamford and wanted to subdivide it to sell off the parcel. And I helped with the subdivision on doing it, and it was a 1 acre zone, but they wanted to do 2 acres lots, and real estate people like William Pitt would tell them, you can't make you can put twice as many houses in there if you do 1 acre than that. So they did 2 acre plots. So there were about 10 sites in there. And Delaney was the first one. No, that was the first house that I did.
Okay.
I did 2 more in that area. One was Hank Taft's house on Westover Road. Did another house for Ted Hobbs down there, the builder.
Was there any kind of reaction to any of these sort of modern houses? I know there was, in New Canaan, there was some sort of friendly friction, I guess, between some of the townsfolks and some of the more modern
I
architecture people?
I didn't find any at all. The atmosphere in Stanford, in particularly, also New Canaan, was from the town officials was very friendly.
In other words, they didn't question anything you did that was new. It wasn't like they would fight you on everything.
The pattern was established, you might say, in the earlier 50s.
Ah, okay. They were broken in already.
They were broken in already.
Okay.
And the publicity that came with Philip Johnson and that was, proud isn't the right word, but they were. It was nice to see that they were on the face of the map.
So they didn't mind the notoriety associated with some of these modern houses?
Yeah, no.
Okay. What was most important to you when working with your modernist clients?
What comes to mind first would be open-mindedness. And that's not just on the client's part, which is quite necessary. It's also on your own part. You're trying to create a feeling, you're not trying to create a thing. There were architects working in the area at the time that wanted to create a monument in a way, big, small, intermediate, but the monument was to themselves. And I know 3 or 4 examples where it occurred. They were much more interested in that than a creative home for the clients and the people that they were working for. I had another client came in, they were moving from Glastonbury, and they had one little child. This was a 59 house in Wilton, but they had to move out of their home in Glastonbury, and they didn't have a place to live, so they lived with us for 2 months.
Okay.
And a little baby. So that's open-mindedness, and it's also luck that you can do that. So our ages were similar. So it's
okay.
Also the clients for these houses, with a few exceptions, were similar to my own age, with similar families. Not exactly the same, but we did have a couple of clients that were in their 60s that we built new houses for. Actually, one in Bronxville and one in New Canaan that were done for senior people at that time.
You were able to speak a similar language and understand the needs for, some people that were kind of in the same stage of life that you were in.
Yeah. The thing is, you have to ask, why were you contacted from these people? They'd done some research, had seen something you'd done. You were looking for architects. One of the houses that I did, I mentioned architects creating something for themselves. One of the houses that I did, the architect had been dismissed because that's what he was doing. He was building something much too grand for the site and the budget and this.
And when you built your house on Benedict Hill Road, that was unlike anything else that had been built at the time in New Canaan. Did you have reaction from the other architects at that time?
I know other architects would come and look at it. John Blackley was one that came over and looked at it. You were curious to see what this was, but New Canaan was full of flat roof buildings and some good work at that time, and this, because it had a different shaped roof, wasn't that much different than other modern houses. I'd call it my house. It was a marriage of form and function, and the engineering part of it was to keep it totally open with just space inside. There was no walls to the ceiling in the whole area.
Yeah, it's like just dividers, it seems like, yeah.
So I actually made our bedroom was on the upper floor, and it had a low ceiling across the bedroom underneath the big ceiling. And when the kids were little, we found them crawling up on top looking down in our bedroom.
That's funny. So John Blackley, he came to look at it.
Yeah, he came, and there were a few others. As far as I was out working someplace, so I wouldn't know who was up and so forth at that time.
Well, you have just so many people that could appreciate something like this. And I know you say that there was other very good architecture there, and I agree. But I think that building is set apart because it's not a flat roof. It's a much more unique kind of structure and involved a much different type of vision than a standard flat roof or shed roof type structure.
Yeah, it didn't, the roof grew. It didn't, I just didn't want to put this roof on a house. It grew from wanting to have some intimate space and other space and looking at forms, pure forms that would do this. And just the hyperbolic paraboloid was the one that kept the low spaces, kept enough high spaces, and kept enough open spaces. And I mentioned the cantilevers because I didn't like the stiff shape of edge beams that just disappeared into piers. And that's why the roof structure, which is 2 layers of Western fir, they were scarfed together, carefully built on the diagonal going across laps, scarfed and lap. And they went over the edge beams with ring connectors, each board with ring connectors down into the edge beams to transfer the forces from the roof. The
shear forces.
The shear forces that went down. And the top of the edge beams had a curved surface. It was curved from the lowest end. The curve would go in one direction. As it reached the highest end, the curve would be another direction. So it was like an airplane wing, the top of these beams. These came from Wisconsin, these beams. So I had 4 airplane wings. So Roy, when he put them up, I came home one day, and he had 2 beams up, and he put the other, and the high part met the low part on the other part. In other words, I had 4 right-hand propellers when I needed 2 left-hand and 2 right-hand. So out of Long Island came 2 carpenters. They spent 2 days hand sewing the 2 of these beams, flipping the edges, the taper on the edges to the other side, and gluing them down and putting them in order so that then it would take the shape. Architects make those kinds of goose.
So in terms of ordering the millwork, it just had come
It was the millwork.
backward.
Yeah.
Did you have any of the architects or any particular houses that you found to be some of your more favorite ones or ones that you particularly respected?
Yeah, I liked some of John Blackley's work and like that. And there was another house of Phillips that I liked. So anyway, it's a vague answer that you got. It's been a long time.
Yeah. Well, it was a long time ago that you lived in New Canaan anyway, when you were around those houses. My one other question just about your house on Benedict Hill is, in terms of living there, you and your family, how did it fit your needs as a young family?
It fitted extremely well. The lower level, I had 3 small kids' bedrooms with everything built in. The drawers and this and everything. So, very, very little furniture. Had a playroom. Had a guest room, which was mainly for grandparents that would come. And the bathroom, the laundry, everything downstairs. And our space was upstairs. And when it was built, I had a pit where the fireplace is. That was a pit. Then the steel bars ran just under the pit, diagonally across there. And when it was sold in '78, the builder filled in the pit, made a level floor out of the first floor.
So it was a pit with a hood over it?
No hood, just a pit. It dropped in the floor in the middle by the fireplace. But to answer it, it fit the house perfectly with the kids and the way we lived and everything. The openness.
Is there an echo in there when you have a bunch of screaming kids?
Yeah, no, it didn't. Sound wasn't, there was no echo with it. And I'm trying, what would that form? Would it concentrate a form? a walk surface like that. It didn't work from that point of view. And we had chickens and had a dog and did what normal, in quotes, normal people do, with a household. The one thing, when we're designing a house, we would get comments like, "Why are you building a house like that? You'll never be able to sell it." I said, "No, we don't want to sell it, we want to live in it." So that was the answer to that.
Rafe, since Jim is no longer with us, this is probably Jim's last interview, right?
Yeah, I feel honored that I was able to spend some time with him and also able to have some input in getting other people to know about him and to hear his voice.
You can see more about Jim Evans and his houses at usmodernist.org/Evans.
Manhattan-based singer Janis Siegel was born in Brooklyn, New York, and began her professional music career at the age of 12 in an all-girl group, The Young Generation. They released 2 singles. Later, they more or less became Laurel Canyon and played and recorded in New York and in Nashville. Since then, Janis has built a formidable solo career while also collaborating with the Manhattan Transfer. Their breakout 1975 album changed vocal music forever with that hit gospel song, Operator. That quickly led to a 4-week TV series with more jazz-inspired songs and, in a twist, the U.S. debut of Bob Marley and the Wailers. Her first of many solo albums was released in 1982, and in 1993, Janis and her Manhattan Transfer colleagues received honorary doctorates from the Berklee School of Music. In 1999, they were among the first inductees into the Vocal Group Hall of Fame. Janis has a stunning 17 Grammy nominations, and that's turned into 9 wins. Her music has also appeared on several movie soundtracks, including Swing Kids, A League of Their Own, and Dick Tracy. Janis still tours with the Manhattan Transfer and teaches master classes online. It's great to have her with us today. Welcome, Janis.
Well, thank you so much, fellas.
Hey, Janis, I can't tell you how excited I am to have you on the show. I am.
Yeah, you can. You can.
Okay. I am full fanboy engaged. Janis, your first big hit with Manhattan Transfer, Operator, that really changed your life, didn't it?
Well, we were surprised, honestly. We made our first record, and that first record was basically stuff we had been doing live for a year or so. It was our repertoire. And then we heard that Operator was this huge hit in the South, because we had never toured there.
Huh.
But in those days, you could actually have a radio hit without having actually been touring the place.
Back in the 70s.
Yeah, we hadn't gotten to the South yet. We were playing mainly the coasts. We played New York, of course, and we ventured out a little bit to Philadelphia and, upstate New York. And then we went to California, and we played San Francisco, L.A., a little bit. But we were pleasantly surprised to know that Operator was in the top 20 on the radio charts.
And the TV show was not too long after that?
Right. TV show was 1975 on CBS.
Okay.
We were a summer replacement series.
Yeah. I mean, that must have been something to just, go from touring these clubs and now all of a sudden you're in a TV production.
Well, you hit the nail right on the head there, architecturally speaking, because we were used to playing these funky underground clubs, and we were nice and raw and unpolished at that time. And then all of a sudden, we're on prime time on national television, CBS, and we had to deal with censors and, all that stuff. We had to be professionals quickly.
Do you have to go wardrobe shopping?
Well, they made clothes for us. They actually had a wardrobe department.
They had a costume designer.
We're talking about CBS, baby.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a wardrobe department, makeup department, wigs.
Wow.
Wigs were flying left and right. We had costumes. We had dancers. We had directors, choreographers,
Everybody.
Everything.
This is full scale.
Everybody was on board, yeah. So it was a shock. It was a complete shock. Plus, we were actually living in L.A. at the time, which was, at that time, I'm talking 1974, 1975, L.A. was vibrant.
Oh, yeah.
L.A. was the center almost of culture, with music, film, politics even,
Now, I've read several accounts about the censorship you mentioned, but I kind of wondered, you guys are a jazz group. You're doing the American Songbook. So what did CBS want to censor of yours?
Well, we did this song called Well, 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 My Cat Fell in the Well.
Yeah.
And it was a double entendre tune. I woke up this morning with a feeling of despair. I looked for my pussy, but my pussy wasn't there, et cetera, et cetera.
I see.
And yeah, we did it, and they did not allow it.
Now I get it.
Even though we presented it as a children's nursery rhyme.
That's sure to doom you to failure. There's no children in the audience.
Well, we were on it at 7 o'clock on Sunday night, the family hour.
Oh, yeah.
So we had to control ourselves.
Well, you're known for tributes to Ella Fitzgerald. What are some of your favorite Ella songs to sing?
Well, she's my idol. Always. It's glorious to listen to Ella. She was just, to me, the epitome of a jazz singer, as far as her tone and her rhythmic sense, her improvisation, playful, musical, always interesting, I think. And just crystalline voice. My favorite Ella tunes, I have different ones I like to listen to, and then I like to perform. To listen to, I love the version she did of I Remember You with the incredible Nelson Riddle arrangement, which is on the Johnny Mercer's Songbook record. But to sing, I do How Long Has This Been Going On? I love to sing Robin's Nest, which was a little bit of an obscure piece she did in tribute to this disc jockey. I forgot his first name, but his last name was Robbins, actually. And I love to do, as many jazz singers have, everyone learned Ella's scat on High, High the Moon.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was no exception, So when I did do a tribute show to Ella, I did that. From her early stuff, I do a Tisket a Tasket with the transfer. And I also like Sing Me a Swing Song, which is from her years with Chick Webb.
One of Ella's recordings was The Tender Trap, written by Jimmy Van Heusen and Sammy Cahn for the film of the same name starring Debbie Reynolds and Frank Sinatra. It was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song, but lost to another song from the same movie. Love is a Many Splendored Thing. Yep.
Oh,
it did.
All right.
It was covered by Bing Crosby, who basically copied everyone's hits. Past podcast guests Stacey Kent and Sammy Davis Jr. Here's Janis with The Tender Trap.
You see a pair of laughing eyes, and suddenly you're sighing sighs. You're thinking nothing's wrong, you string along, boy, then snap. Those eyes, those sighs, they're part of the tender trap. You're hand in hand beneath the trees, and soon there's music in the breeze. You're acting kinda smart until your heart just goes whack. Those trees that breeze, they're part of the tender trap. Some starry night when his kisses make you tingle, for being single. And all at once it seems so nice. The folks are throwing shoes and rice. You hurry to a spot that's just a dot on the map. You wonder how it all came about. It's too late now, there's no getting out. You fell in love, and love is the tender trap. Some starry night when his kisses make you tingle, he'll hold you tight and you'll hate yourself for being single. And all at once it seems so nice. The folks are throwing shoes and rice. You hurry to a spot that's just a dot on the map. You wonder how it all came about. It's too late now, there's no getting out. You fell in love, and love is the tender trap. Love is a tender trap. The tender trap. Those eyes, they're all part of the tender trap.
I love the drum break in there.
Yeah, that's Matt Wilson on drums, and you know who the sax player was.
No, I don't.
I'm going to give you one guess. No, I'm going to give you two guesses. No, it's the legendary Hank Crawford,
Oh, really?
who played with Ray Charles. Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah.
I think there's one of the last sessions he did, actually.
Well, lucky you.
I know. Tell me about it.
Janice, tell us about vocal gumbo. This sounds delicious.
Doesn't it?
Yes.
It's all right. I will tell you all about it. It was born of the pandemic. Lauren Kinnan, who is my homegirl, a good dear friend and colleague, she is the alto in the vocal group, the New York Voices. So we really do have a lot in common. Besides singing the alto part in vocal groups, we also love to produce and arrange and sing background vocals and cook. And, so we had a show in New York called Vocal Mania, which was a live show every month at a fantastic place called the Zinc Bar. And we would curate a vocal evening for vocalists, usually in New York, or we try and snag someone who was in town. Sometimes we get lucky. We get somebody from other parts of the world that happened to be in New York. we lured them to come perform. And Lauren and I would curate, and then we'd sing backgrounds for our special guests, and we'd do solo things. And it was a really great live experience, everyone packed into this little club. So obviously the pandemic hit, right? And we'd been doing it for 2 years straight. So the pandemic hits, and now it's like, well, I can't live without this now. Now I'm addicted to this, learning new songs every month and, making arrangements for other people. And so Lauren and I decided to put it online with the help of we needed a third partner, and that was Lori Green, who is the Manhattan Transfer's road manager and super organized, wonderful, creative lady. So the three of us started Vocal Gumbo, which is Vocal Mania online, basically, but with the added attraction of being able to reach out to any singer all over the world, because we knew where everybody was.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
true. They were all...
We knew no one was working.
Yeah, at home.
So it's collaborations at home, everyone at home. But Lauren and I would sometimes do background vocals in our own separate studios, and we'd produce these videos and then have an incredible show with artists from Japan, from Spain, from Cape Verde Islands, from Hawaii, from Canada, from France. So that's what we've been doing for a little over a year now.
And people can find some of that online, right? If they Google
Absolutely.
Vocal Gumbo?
Vocalgumbo.com is our website, and that will give you information about our next show. Our next show is actually a kind of transition thing, because we're all just sort of getting back into the world. We're going to do a Vocal Gumbo live.
Oh, good.
From my apartment, actually. So that's going to be at the end of May. And then June is going to be a regular Vocal Gumbo. But, we're thinking of how we can transition this also back integrated into our lives once we start back to work. I mean, I'm not really starting back to work till August.
Well, I can't wait. I want to get some tickets.
Yes, and you can, I think the website really, we also have a Facebook page, but vocalgumbo.com has some of the archived collaborations with Diane Reeves, with Kate McGarry, some wonderful artists, Raul Madan. And then we'll tell you when the next Vocal Gumbo is and how to access it. I've never been so busy, actually, so creatively busy.
If people watched the TV medical show House in the 2000s, Dr. House's best friend was played by Robert Sean Leonard. A decade or so before that, he was the star of the movie Swing Kids, with a plot about Hitler Youth dancing to American swing music at night. Costing $13 million, it only took in 10, and Roger Ebert immediately put it on his most hated list.
Oops.
However, the soundtrack saved the movie and its unwieldy cast of Leonard, Christian Bale, Barbara Hershey, and Noah Weil, with Kenneth Branagh and Doc Martens Martin Clunes as the Nazis.
Huh.
If you're into swing dance, as I was back in the day, one song saves the film. Based on an Andrews Sisters hit, but with a much better arrangement, Janis Siegel recorded Bermir Mr. Schön, which you can hear on iTunes. Besides dancing, I can highly recommend it for prep work in the kitchen. Just play and chop like no one's watching. Janis, how did you get connected to that film and that song?
My friend Robert Kraft was producing the soundtrack, I believe, and he asked me to come in and sing Bermir Mr. Schön, which I think is based on the original Benny Goodman arrangement.
What does it mean?
Yiddish, isn't it?
Oh.
Is Yiddish. That's okay. I don't really know what it means, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we'll look it up.
The whole lyric is in English.
Yeah, it is.
Basically.
Oh,
The
okay.
whole song.
Yeah. But I did just do an entire Yiddish record called Mazel, which is out also on iTunes. During the pandemic, I finished 2 solo records, so
Wow.
that was kind of fun. Mazel is with a cantor Daniel Kramer, and jazz pianist John DiMartino. And we definitely explored some Yiddish swing and some of the more traditional tunes.
We're going to play another song. This one was written around 1970 by Wayne Carson, Johnny Christopher, and Mark James. It's been performed in almost every genre: pop, synth pop, country, jazz. It was released by Elvis just after he broke up with Priscilla, by Willie Nelson, of course, Brenda Lee, the Pet Shop Boys, and about 300 others. Plus, it was kind of a standard in the video games Dance Dance Revolution X and XT. Here's Janis Siegel with Always on My Mind.
Maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should have. And maybe I didn't love you quite as often as I could have. Little things I should have said and done, I just never took the time. But you were always on my mind. You were always on my mind. Maybe I didn't hold you all those lonely, lonely times. And I guess I never told you I'm so happy that you're mine. If I made you feel second best, I'm so sorry I was blind. 'Cause you were always on my mind. You were always on my mind. Tell me that your sweet love hasn't died. And give me one more chance to keep you satisfied. Little things I should have said and done, I just never took the time. But you were always on my mind. You were always on my mind. You were always on my mind.
That was beautiful. Just beautiful.
Thank you so much. That actually is the second solo record I made, which is a sort of country jazz record called Crying in My Whiskey. That is also on iTunes.
Janis, thanks so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure.
My pleasure, Georgia. I love this idea of mixing talk about architecture and music.
Yeah, we hope it works.
Yeah.
No.
One day we'll be a hit.
Yeah, well, music is architecture, certainly.
Architecture is frozen music is the great quote.
That's right. It is.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by Modernist realtor Angela Roll. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit USModernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 8,000 significant modernist houses, and access 3.2 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino researches guests while listening to John, Paul, George, and Ringo and her 2 kids, who most days pretend to be interested. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another 5th Beatle Harvard 6 edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.